Thank you. Susan SOHandley has been involved with local Audubon chapters for over 30 years and has served on the board of directors for the Delaware-Otsego Audubon Society since 2012, including 10 years as co-president. Susan also works with the Audubon New York, Connecticut Council Board, which is composed of 27 Audubon chapters in New York State and 6 chapters in Connecticut. She also serves on the advisory board for Audubon New York, Connecticut Regional Office as the chapter representative. Susan owns and operates a small digital marketing agency in Hartwick, New York. We are thankful for her program tonight. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be back. I think this is going to be a very helpful program, and our goal is saving birds, so this is something that we can all do to help. I'm going to take a second so that I can get my screen share set up and make sure that's working properly for everybody. Is everybody able to see the screen with the title screen area?
Yes, Susan.
Okay, and you don't see my presenter, my speaker's notes or anything like that, right?
We do not. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So this particular slideshow is shared with us through the Bird Collision Working Group, which is a collaboration between the Acopian Center for Ornithology and Lehigh Valley Audubon Society and Pennsylvania Audubon. And they've been working on this issue for quite some time. I think the first presentations that they started doing on this were somewhere around like 2015. So at least 10 years ago, they really dug into this issue and have made a lot of progress in their region. And they very graciously updated all their data for the slideshow for the use of chapters in New York and Connecticut to use as we kind of push this out as an initiative that's coordinated throughout New York and Connecticut this year by all of our Audubon chapters. So I have made modifications for my own use, and they have no problem with us doing that, but I do want to give that credit to that group because it's important to recognize that. So I do see a hand up. If you have a question, you can pop it in the Q&A because I may answer questions as we go forward. And if you put it in the Q&A box, it will actually track those questions for us so that we can tell what's been answered and what hasn't. So most of us are now familiar with the 2019 report from researchers that sounded the alarm on declines in the numbers of our birds since 1970. It's known as the 3 Billion Birds Report, and it really showed that our birds overall were just declining very significantly in numbers. And then you may or may not be aware that about a month ago, there was a release of a new report for basically the state of the birds 2025, which is a status assessment of the health of the nation's bird populations, published by scientists from conservation groups, bird conservation groups. And that report is indicating that these declines are continuing. Ducks in the last 5 years are seeing deep declines, even though their populations had been doing fairly well. So just over the last 5 years, we're seeing, some pretty significant changes there. And then most are continuing on a declining track, and most notably grassland and arid land birds, as you can see from this graph down on the very far right. Those are just plunging with 41%, 43% declines. Our eastern forest birds are seeing a very slight uptick in numbers, but that's only for a few species, so the overall is still not in a good condition. So 27% decline in abundance is where we are currently. And if you're interested in looking at the full report, it's a very easy link, stateofthebirds.org. And then they have their reports based on the year. So just look for 2025 and it should bring you right there. So conservation for birds is looking at hemispheric conservation and protection kind of throughout the whole life cycle of birds, both winter and spring, summer, fall. And there are things that we can do to help impact that. But taking local actions is really where we can help on an individual basis to reduce bird deaths. So we either have to make sure birds survive through their life cycle, or we have to decrease mortality. So our portion here is focusing on decreasing mortality. And how big a deal are bird window collisions and what can we do to reduce them? The goal of today's talk is to introduce you to this issue and hopefully impress upon us all on how widespread and disastrous it is and how avoidable it can be. Bird window collisions are the third leading cause of bird deaths, first being habitat degradation and loss, and second being predation by cats, and then bird window collisions is third. So most people, and certainly all of us here today, like and enjoy birds. We put a great deal of time, effort, and money into attracting birds to our yards. We investing in equipment to watch them and listen to them. We feed them, we study them, and they bring us joy. We configure our yards with bird feeders and plants where we can provide food and cover. We add fountains and water sources and bird baths, all to attract birds to our yards and to benefit them, and also to be able to enjoy watching them. But the problem is we also have windows, and where birds are near windows, there is always a risk of collision. Anecdotally, the Romans were the first people known to have used glass for windows, but it would be about 1,000 years before transparent glass windows were commonly used in ordinary homes. And the first documented bird window collision for North America was a sharp-shinned hawk flying through a greenhouse glass pane in 1832. So the painful fact is that windows are killing birds. And there's a lot of them out there. So the number of windows is beyond calculation. Every home, every office complex, college campuses, all types of buildings have windows, and each one of them has potential to kill birds. So Dr. Daniel Clem began studying this in 1974. And he's done a ton of research. Much of what we know today is either directly from his research or from research based upon his work. And when he started this research, he was pretty much the only person out there doing it. And the encouraging thing is that now there are many people working on this problem, and they're working on it worldwide. So in 1979, Dr. Clem estimated between 100 million and 1 billion birds died at glass every year in the US. And in 2014, Scott Loss and others moved that number to between 365 million to 1 billion birds die at glass annually in the US. And the more we learn, the worse it gets. In 2024, researchers published a paper that moved that low estimate up to an average of 3.5 million collisions every day, and that number is likely much higher. So the facts are painful, but we can't ignore it. We have to face it, that our windows are killing birds. And if you follow the news, you hear about bird deaths from poisoning, from wind turbines, electrocutions, oil spills, cars, all these other causes, but only every few years about these big mortalities of birds flying into buildings, usually in bad weather. And these news stories, sometimes hundreds and thousands of bird deaths. But when we talk about bird window collisions, we're talking about 1 billion plus. So bird window collisions in cities along migratory corridors can be just very striking, and they always make the news because there's hundreds of dead and dying birds found outside of individual buildings. The mass mortality events draw a lot of attention, and that's the reason why most people think that cities are the main locations for bird window collisions, but it's actually not. These events occur in the big collision events in cities occur typically in bad weather when migrating birds are forced to fly lower than normal and placing them closer to cities. And then on cloudy nights, the reflected light blinds them, confuses them, and causes them to exhaust themselves until they have to land. And then when they're ready to fly again, typically in the morning, they're faced with these glass canyons with a lot of confusing noise and all of the activity of a city trying to fly into reflections of the sky and into glass that surrounds them, that looks like it's inviting vegetation. But those events are actually infrequent. We hear about the big collisions events, but they're a very small percentage of the annual mortality. So the interesting part of this one is we would need 3,500 of those largest events per day to account for the average loss due to collisions. So some of these numbers are definitely staggering. It's the sheer number of smaller buildings that make them the leading locations for collisions. So you can see here, 44% are residences that are 1 to 3 stories high, and the 56% low-rise buildings, 4 to 11 stories, and then less than 1% of those bird deaths are attributed to high-rise buildings in cities. So the good thing is, as homeowners, we don't need permission from anybody to make our windows bird friendly. So if it's done properly, we could save up to 150 birds over a 15-year time frame just from each house. These numbers add up, and each of them matters. And I had originally, when I first heard of this, it was the numbers were 2 birds per home per year, but that number has actually increased at this point to 10 birds per home per year. So that, again, is fairly significant. The problem is that there are lots of dead birds because they just don't see glass as an obstacle to avoid. People don't see it unless it's obvious. Only 2% of collisions leave a body, and very few collisions leave any evidence on glass. So most of the time this will happen, and a homeowner would never, ever be aware of it. Field studies have shown that even a trained person will not find evidence of an observed bird strike 50 to 80% of the time. In a field study where trained observers witnessed 1,356 window collisions, only 50% left any evidence at all. On clean glass, a documented observed strike, an observer checked glass closely from all angles, counted the slightest smudges, and in one experiment, it was thought most people would only document 5% of strikes, if that. People that notice a collision see the bird fly away and think it's okay because the types of injuries documented to, because of the types of injuries that are documented to occur in a collision, it is thought that even though it flies away, that many of the birds end up dying later. And they're going undercover, they're out of sight under bushes, and those deaths go unnoticed. So even though a bird hits a window and flies away, it's very likely that they will die shortly thereafter. We don't see piles of dead birds for a number of reasons, one of which is that there's a lot of different things that eat birds. And there's a photo with a chipmunk eating a goldfinch, and a cat with a dead bird. Other animals, skunks, squirrels, insects, all eat dead birds. So the kind of the housekeepers in the natural world kind of clean up that debris. So we don't often find them, and we're not aware of that. Birds have incredibly flexible necks, and X-rays, hundreds of X-rays, have actually shown that they do not break their necks when they collide with glass, which is what most people assume. But what does happen is they end up with concussions and internal injuries, and those can take days to kill that bird. And because birds need to stay active to survive, when they're injured and they don't receive any kind of medical attention, they basically will die out of sight and out of mind, and become easy prey. So window collisions kill some of the most fit of the population, not just the weak and unfit. And that becomes a risk to weaken the gene pool. And even if the bird is only stunned or slightly injured, it can make that bird fall easy prey to predators. So why are these occurring? Why do birds collide with glass? So they simply do not see glass, and they can't recognize the concept that buildings hold glass. So glass poses two major problems. It's either clear and see-through, or it's reflective. When windows in a building line up with one another, birds can often see habitat on the far side and try to fly through to it. And they'll often hit that with a kind of a hard force. And in this picture here, the lower half of these windows show the see-through effect, whereas the upper parts show the reflective effect. So this is one house, one set of windows with both of those issues present. And without something to give birds a clue not to fly into it, you can see how the reflected habitat can be deceptive to a bird. This window that's pictured here has the Acopian bird savers in front of the glass. Glass walkways at any level, whether they're high or low, can be particularly lethal. But any kind of glass structure that allows birds to see habitat through it can be lethal, including glass walls, noise barriers, things like bus shelters, glass artworks, etc. This is a 10-inch by 24-inch basement window that is reflecting vegetation. And look at the location of this very small window and wonder why a bird would try to fly through it and not just go around the building entirely. So in this situation, the homeowner was drinking morning coffee on that deck and heard the thud of a bird colliding into that window, and ended up finding a dead juvenile robin. So birds are used to flying through tight spaces, and almost no window is too small to have that fatal effect. This was a mourning dove strike. Sky is clearly reflected in the side window. And again, why not go over rather than through that small space? And that's because that looked like a clear passage for that bird. So what they've learned is that wherever glass and birds occur in the same area, birds have the potential to die. And there is simply no safe place where birds are safe near glass. So again, most collisions are reported during migration and in urban areas because when they do occur, you can get hundreds of bird strikes at one time and in full view of people on the sidewalks. And this typically will make news and make headlines so that people are prompted to act. But research has shown that it is the day-to-day collisions that occur year-round at residential and low-rise buildings that account for the majority of bird window collisions annually. So these are often at homes with good habitat, bird feeders that offer food and shelter. There was one bird enthusiast who reported recording an average of 100 strikes annually at one bay window that faced their feeders. So for this, we're concentrating on where most collisions occur per year, and it's the sheer number of windows in our homes, schools, corporate buildings, college campuses that cause the greatest number of deaths. So when large numbers of birds are attracted to an area that is near glass windows, there's more likelihood that those collisions will occur. 1,476 species worldwide have been documented to die colliding with glass. 322 of them in North America have been documented, and the list of species colliding with windows and glass continues to grow. And any species that occurs near unprotected glass will eventually end up on that list. So sadly, our glass kills birds, but there is something we can do about it. So I'm going to go into solutions next. So what can be done to reduce this carnage? There's a lot of misconceptions about what actually works to reduce these bird collisions, and the following slides are based on properly run field experiments of which results have been published in peer-reviewed publications. Since birds do not recognize glass, we must either physically prevent them from flying into it or make it a visible barrier that they can avoid. So number one includes hanging netting in front of your windows or leaving your screens in year-round. Those can both work. And then number two is making glass visible to birds. So this is the most used method and can be accomplished using decals, stickers, strings, paints, dots, films, anything that birds can see and avoid. And then there are two very important rules that must be followed to make this effective. The first is the 2x4 rule for spacing of any item used to make a pattern. Patterns using a wider spacing, either vertically or horizontally, will likely increase the likelihood of collision. And some use a 2x2 pattern to offer better protection for smaller birds. So the recommendation now is actually, if you're using decals, to use 2x2 spacing, but the 4-inch spacing is still okay for other prevention methods. We'll talk about that in a minute. Anything that you hang on the window or hang on the glass to make it visible to birds has to be on the exterior surface, because sometimes, depending on the lighting of the room inside, if it's darker than the outdoors, like even untinted glass can act like a mirror if that's the case. So it'll mask the view of anything placed on the inside, and it will still cause those reflections, and collisions won't be prevented. There are exceptions to that. Closing blinds, other items on the inside can help, but applying your treatments on the outside and exterior surface is the best. Using mid-range estimates in the study, collision deaths are about 10 birds per year per household. Even at an 80% effective system will save over 100 birds plus over 15 years of that system. And the Copian bird savers that we're using in our workshops are estimated to be like between 92 and 96% effective. So that's preventing bird deaths. And these are pictures of those Acopian bird savers. These are a good example of the 2x4 rule in a vertical format. They're inexpensive, they're easy to make, they're self-cleaning. You can clean behind them without having to remove anything. And they're very simple paracord hanging on 4-inch centers. The spacing works because the cords are not directly on the surface of the window and are therefore multiplied by the reflection, and there's movement to them unless you attach them at the bottom. This window averaged 100 strikes a year until bird savers were installed, and now they have maybe 2 to 3 strikes per year maximum. So this is basically what you need to make them, which again, very, very simple, not super expensive, very efficient. And this is what we'll be using at the Earth Festival event next Saturday and at the workshop in Sydney or in Delhi on May 3rd. So we're happy to, basically work with homeowners for up to 3 windows at our booth or through our workshop. Homeowners can do 3 windows for free as long as we have materials that last, which I think we have plenty, but we'll see. When you register for the workshop, you actually receive the link so that you can submit the window measurements. We are tracking kind of square area, square foot area of how much bird surface we are protecting from collisions as part of this program. There's also the option for the feather-friendly decals. So using the feather-friendly tape in a 2x2 pattern is an effective solution as well. These are simple to apply. It's basically a good DIY project, and they come in kits. So we have the option when you register for the workshops, if you prefer to do feather-friendly, we can submit an order for you for this. So we'll basically gather all our orders, we'll submit the order, and then have a pickup day where you can come and pick those up. And those are unfortunately not included in our free windows because they are more expensive, and we wanted to do as much as we could with the money that we had. But we're basically happy to help provide them. And basically they come in a narrow tape that you would adhere to your windows in 2-inch measured spacing. And you get a scraper tool so that you can just rub over that tape, and that helps to affix the decals to your window. And then you peel the tape off and the decals stay. And they definitely seem to have some good lasting power on windows. If you have larger windows and you want to do more rows at a time, they do come in 3-inch width tape. And then for commercial buildings where they have really big windows, we can basically get 3-foot width rolls of this. So just to help save on the labor of actually installing. So there's also other options. This is Kaleidoscape, which is a photo printed on this material. This is the window film that's used for advertising on buses. You can see through it from the inside, but on the outside it appears solid. Comes in many colors. You can also print them with any pattern or photograph. This is an example from Hawk Mountain in Pennsylvania of Kaleidoscape. And as you can see, it's a solid print on the outside of their door, but looking from the inside out, it's clear and see-through. You can also cut Kaleidoscape into individual decals of any shape. Size and shape does not matter, but the spacing does. So it's that 2x2 rule. Birds will hit any spacing that is larger than that. And of course, anything is better than nothing. So if you don't have exact dimensions and they're a little bit wider, you will still be preventing bird strikes from that. And then the Kaleidoscape product also has different options that are available, including a clear option, which basically it almost looks like bubble wrap. But I guess the birds actually do see that. And you can see the window comparison of without and with the clear Kaleidoscape. I would expect that that would still, that still looks reflective to my eye. But I guess birds will see that differently. And it is a proven effective method. American Bird Conservancy has their bird tape, which is basically just decal in strip form, that again are placed in a 2 by 2 inch pattern. So no more than 2 inches between each strip. There are also things like glass pens, which are markers that you can actually use on glass, and these can be effective. They're inexpensive, widely available, easy to use. And then there's also things like tempera paint, where you can make your own patterns, make your own designs, and kind of do what you would like on that window. So it's just definitely options. So leaving blinds down and partially closed can help, but this method works best when the interior is well lit or there are windows on both sides of the room. And Audubon, Pennsylvania has a toolkit that has a lot of these materials that you can download and resource materials that are available. You can also check with us and we can get packet of materials for you as well if you're interested in more. So currently in the US, there's no official standard or ranking or testing for products claiming to be bird friendly. There are products marketed as bird friendly that have been proven to actually be more lethal than regular untreated sheet glass. So there is a level of research when you're deciding to purchase a product that claims to be effective. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. So some of examples of things that do not work. In this case, you have the raptor silhouettes, but there's not enough of these decals to actually prevent birds from trying to fly through the spaces that are surrounding where the decals are placed. So they would need to follow that 2 by 2 rule again for that. And again, 2 by 2 rule or the 2 by 4 rule updated. Although there are products that claim to work because of ultraviolet light, if you can see it, birds can too. So products work because birds can see them. These are not singled out and are only provided as an example of how we need to be careful of what a product claims and what has been tested in the field. And this was interesting to me when I first heard it. Bird feeders closer than 3 feet prevent birds at your feeder from building up enough momentum to harm themselves on your window if they should hit it. So they actually did studies on the placement of bird feeders and the likelihood of window collisions. So basically what they found is the closer the feeder is to the home, the less likelihood of a window strike. So 30 meters, 10 meters was as far as they went in the experiment. We don't know after that. So 10 meters is about 30 feet. Don't know if they placed it at 20 meters, if that would continue to increase or if it would decline. But I thought that was an interesting piece. So birds can see ultraviolet spectrum and we cannot. And there is work that's currently being done to develop products that have patterns that birds can see and use to avoid glass, but that humans cannot see, and therefore does not interfere with our view. This is a prototype UV window film with reflective strips alternating with absorbing strips. And it was found to be over 90% effective in field tests, but it is not yet available commercially. So the left photo shows a perfectly clear window view. The right photo shows the same piece of glass in a darkened room with black light and what we can assume birds see. There are 2 companies currently that offer glass that use UV signals that deter bird window collisions and have fields testing. Walker Glass in Montreal and Guardian Glass in Michigan. Neither are as effective as properly spaced visual markers, but do offer a fairly effective alternative when visual markers are not an option. When you're doing new construction or replacement windows, both of these can offer that component under conditions. So one of the other interesting things about the UV coatings or process is that they don't work as effectively in a see-through setting, but that they do work very well in reflective. So we were talking about that earlier. And the good news is that industry is taking note of the growing demand for solutions and options for these types of products. There is a lot of window films and glass with visible patterns that are designed for retrofits and that are now being used to reduce and prevent collisions. But right now they're mostly available for commercial markets, and the thought is that it's only a matter of time before that comes to the residential market as well. So lots of choices out there, especially for homeowners. Most decal options require that visible 2x2 rule on the outside surface, and the Acopian bird savers, which like you see on the bottom left here, the 4-inch spacing is fine. So there's a lot of reasons why we want to protect birds, in addition to their physical beauty and how we appreciate their songs and their variety and their behaviors and all of the things that they do ecologically for us, like controlling insect populations, pollinating plants, dispersing seeds. We depend on them for a lot of that work. And if birds decline and cease to exist, then the canary in the coal mine. We have to keep an eye on that and take those warnings very seriously. And this is one way that we can help. So if you want to learn more about Dr. Clem's research, he does have a book called Solid Air, The Invisible Killer, which is available on Amazon or other bookstores, I'm sure, at this point. I don't want to stop there because I do want to talk just very briefly about lights out initiatives. Basically, most birds in North America are migratory. 70% of terrestrial birds are migratory, and 80% of those migrate at night. And I never knew that, but it's something that I have learned. Birdcast is a website you can go to that is a great resource to watch migration, and they use radar to track this. So this image is 12:30 a.m. on April 26th last year, recording 334.5 million birds in flight at that time, which is an amazing number. Birdcast maintains records for every day, and they also provide predictions for when birds will be on the move. In our region, spring migration takes place between about April 1st and the end of May, with our peak days typically being about April 20th to May 20th. There's some fluctuation in dates there depending on the region. The Albany area tends to be a little bit earlier than the Binghamton area. We're kind of in between there. So those are just kind of general dates, but there are things that can impact that. Artificial light proves to be a huge migratory challenge. The Eastern Flyway includes some of the most light impacted areas. Oh,
I don't think other people see
Charlie, I think you're
That's
unmuted. Sorry. So the Eastern Flyway includes some of the most light impact areas in the U.S. The left image is satellite image showing light impacts at night, and the right image shows the percentage above normal light with the highest percentages of difference shown in the red pink areas. So basically, birds get confused by the artificial lights and often find themselves in environments with a lot of glass the next morning and then end up flying into reflective surfaces that surround them. This is artificial lights confuse and attract birds during migration. This is a video of birds that get stuck in the 9/11 memorial tribute lights at the World Trade Center. And you can see all of those little dots are birds. And New York City Bird Alliance actually has volunteers that go out and stay around that clock, watching those lights and monitoring how many birds they're seeing in those lights. So the birds kind of get captured and stuck in there. And you'll also see they're flying very, very close to that building on the right and the structure there. So they'll actually monitor those lights and then request that when they hit a certain critical number, like 10,000 birds, they estimate, at one particular time in those lights, they'll ask the tribute committee to actually turn those lights off for about 10 or 15 minutes so that any of those birds that are trapped in the lights can actually move out of them and kind of be released from that. So it's kind of a striking example for that. And I'll go on to the next slide here. So basically, light pollution, is another important challenge here. And you'll see like a spectrum of lights from a light polluted sky to a visible night sky. Unshielded lights, you can see there's just a lot of lost light going every direction. And then as you move towards the right, each type of light shielding kind of gets a little bit better. So a very small cap at the top is still releasing light in the wrong directions. The third picture is light that just keeps the horizontal protected, but you're still using a lot more, you're losing a lot more light than you're using. And then the fourth picture is a fully shielded light that is directing the light downward towards the area where you need it for safety. And then the best in this scale is a fully shielded light, but one that's on a timer. So it only goes on and off when it's being used and when it's needed. So those are important. And then this particular sequence here is a little bit additional information. You have shielding, but then you also have things like color temperature. So bright white lights are harder for birds than warm yellow lights. The intensity of lights make a difference. So using your dimmer switches on lighting can actually help. And then timing, similarly to the prior slide. So having lights that come on and off only as they're needed. So 5 principles for outdoor lighting. All light should have a clear purpose. They should be targeted and directed only to where they're needed. They should be no brighter than necessary. should be used only when it's useful, so that control and then that color factor, using warmer color lights where it's possible. And then indoor lighting kind of follows through similarly. So lights on only in rooms that you need, and you'll save energy with that as well. Draw your blinds, pull down shades so that that light from your home doesn't get reflected outwards, using warm colors and hues and motion sensors and timers. And then dim the lights for birds at night. And basically remember, migration season is where this is really critical. So over this next couple weeks, the less light pollution we have, the better it's going to be for birds. And I also just want to very quickly touch upon legislation. HR 3871, Federal Birds Safe Buildings Act, is something that was proposed a couple of years ago. Don't know whether that will ever reach the floor for any kind of movement at this point, but it's out there and potentially a pending in the future piece. In New York State, though, there are two bills currently that are in the Senate that we will probably have more information on later in the year. Dark Skies Protection Act, which basically is making your lighting friendly for birds, especially if with I can't remember if it's basically geared towards new construction and retrofits. So it puts parameters in place that lighting needs to have the ability to be turned off or dimmed indoors, your outdoor lighting, etc. And then the New York Bird Safe Building Act, which is also known as the FLACO Act, which is working with state-owned buildings and taking action there to reduce collisions for birds there. So that's all I have. I'm happy to take any questions. Visit us at Earth Festival next weekend. Make sure you register so that we know we bring enough materials with us. But three windows per home, and come to Earth Festival. We have a lot more going on. You can learn about membership and all the other things that we do. And thank you very much. So I don't know if there's questions. I'm going to stop the share.
Thank you, Susan. There have been a number of questions. Early on, someone asked, can having window screens help prevent bird collisions?
Yes. So window screens actually, oh, are you seeing me here?
We still see your last slide.
Okay, I got a Windows. Please move window away from application. Zoom may be crashing. All right. Are you still able to see me, hear me? Anything there?
We see your small image next to your last slide.
Okay. I'm looking to see if I can figure out why Zoom seems to be crashing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, can you do me a favor and try to share your screen? And just so that it will disable my screen share? Or if I can talk, I'll just try to answer questions until this like decides it wants to work or not.
I've sent the request.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead with questions. I'll just
Sure.
answer while the screen is there.
So window screens help prevent bird collisions?
Yes. Yes. Because they'll kind of bounce off of them to some degree as opposed to hitting that hard surface. And they also will provide that visual barrier that won't be as reflective as plain glass.
And the paracord, there's a couple of questions there. one person says, I'm in New Jersey and I can't make the workshops, how can I get instructions for making the paracord system?
I have those and I can send them to you. If you would email us at info@doas.us, I will send you the instructions and include any insight that I have learned while making them.
And a related question is there a certain color for the paracord or does any color work or what?
Any color will work, but it is recommended to go with a darker color. So we're using a dark olive green for the ones that we're making. And I think that is, they look nice, I think, when they're hung. And what's amazing about it is from everything I've learned from people who have the bird savers and the decals is that your brain actually adjusts to having them there, and you'll see them for the first day, and after the first day you just see right through them like they're not even there. So that's pretty incredible brain work.
Yes.
Thank you. Now it's working better, I think. Um, Another question that came up was, what about washing your windows with all this stuff on the window? Is that a problem?
I don't see Susan at all, nor do I hear her.
Right, neither me neither. Okay, well, someone asked the question of how to contact DOAS. Susan said that once, I'll just repeat it. You can contact us by email at info, at DOAS.us.
And
Yeah,
as
this
long,
is Andy. I do recall Susan mentioning that it was easy to wash the windows behind the cords, that they were, they were not really in the way when you went to wash your windows. At some earlier point in the program, she said that. Yeah.
Thank
yes,
you, Andy.
let's see, let me get back here. Uh, a person wished to announce to this group that next Tuesday at 9:45 a.m., 80K Susquehanna chapter will hold its regular hike at Table Rocks, followed by a noonish tour of the exhibit at Hartwick's Jaeger Museum, entitled "With the Shadow Over Them: Constructing Catskill Reservoirs, Remembering Home." The person thought that folks at this at this event would enjoy knowing that information, might want to attend. And
Okay,
I
I guess
think
we,
might be contacted by Susan right now. Bear with me, please. Her Zoom is frozen. And at this point, we may wish to, are there any further questions?
I don't have any others, no.
Quick question here to confirm there are 1.3 to 3.5 billion birds dying annually. Excuse me, I'm talking too fast. Question, is this in the US, North America, or worldwide? US, I believe.
Yes, I think that's true. The numbers that I've seen come from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they match those numbers pretty well. So I would say that's for the U.S.
Very good. Thank you. I have nothing further as far as questions go.
There was a request for the email address to contact the OAS, and I just put that in the chat there. So it's
Oh, great.
DOAS, info@doas.us. Pretty short.
Very nice. And lots of thanks to Susan for her program. And I thank her too. We thank her.
That's right.
And
Okay. So I guess we'll say good night to all, and yeah, I'll add my thanks to Becky's, and hopefully see you at the Earth Festival next Saturday.